The latest Newspoll is showing a mood for change in Canberra. A majority of voters believe Labor doesn't deserve a second term in office. Live in the studio is the Australian's political editor, Simon Benson. Simon, welcome. Well, let's go through these numbers. I want to start with one point you made in your analysis. Long story short, there's nothing in today's poll that either side should be too excited about.
No, not at all. As you point out, a third of voters don't believe that the Albanese government deserves to be re-elected. A mood for change, as you call it. That doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a change. And if you look at the underlying Newspoll numbers for the party vote, neither side are at a point where either of them could form a majority government. Labor on 31% doesn't get a majority government. The Coalition at 38% doesn't get majority government. So, as you and I have talked about consistently, probably over the course of 12 months, there's nothing has changed in those polls. It is not breaking either way. So the hung parliament scenario is still probably the most likely.
And in terms of where things go as we approach the campaign and the election day itself, we look to these numbers to see, is there a tightening? Do they break one way or the other? Because at the moment there's no indication that they are breaking one way or the other at this point.
No, not at all. And that's been the consistency in the Newspoll. So I suppose, it depends which way you look at it, whether the numbers are good or bad, the fact that they haven't moved. From Labor's point of view, I'd be deeply concerned about where their primary vote is at 31%. I'd have to go back to the 80s to the Newspoll master archive, but I don't recall a Labor government ever going to an election on a primary vote so low. On the other hand, the Coalition have been at that level before, the 38%. It's not beyond the possibility that they could tip that into the 40s, and it changes the equation entirely for the election. I think what these numbers prove, though, is that more than ever, the campaign is going to be critical, and whichever leader presents the best is probably going to win.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you on that. This campaign, Simon, from so many that we've covered, looks like there is so much at stake in terms of how potent the strategies are from both sides. I think the advertising from both sides, whether there are any gaffes or implosions from the leaders, and who is the sharper performer. All of that is going to be so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. For Labor to retain a majority government, absolutely everything must go right. For the Coalition to win a majority, everything must go wrong for Albanese. But I just cannot see how Labor forms majority government on these numbers. But as you say, minds will sharpen. As soon as they call the election, voters will sharpen their focus more. And I think the first sort of Newspoll of the campaign will give us an indication whether it does break one way or the other.
And give us a sense for our viewers who are just catching up with the numbers on the personal ratings for the two and the head-to-head number as well.
Yeah, well,
because I think that tells an interesting story.
It does, and that's troubling. I guess there's two ways to look at it from Labor and Anthony Albanese's point of view. Anthony Albanese is at -21, so his approval ratings are not getting any better. In fact, they're getting worse. Dutton's are slightly improving, so he goes in at -10. So you've got two leaders who, I guess it's a choice for voters about who they dislike the least rather than who they like the best. But that's troubling for Anthony Albanese. At those numbers, he goes into the election with an anchor around his heels as well, which is the Labor primary vote of 31. Now, you'd expect the Prime Minister to be able to drag that vote up, but his numbers aren't very good. Some people may look at it the other way around and say Anthony Albanese is an anchor around Labor's vote. I mean, it's 6 of one and half dozen of the other. But they have a big task ahead to improve that Labor primary vote. With Anthony Albanese's numbers so low in terms of approval, that's going to be difficult.
Yeah, and the issue with the Coalition primary vote not being in the 40s, complicated by a few points, One Nation and the Teals. So they're losing it on the right and the left, in a sense. But those votes, would they largely go back to the Coalition where there is...
Not all of it. not all. In terms of One Nation, not all of it. And One Nation's vote is up 2 points from the last election, and it got to 5%, I think, last time. It's now sitting at 7%, but that's probably a product of Clive Palmer not being around. I think One Nation picked up a few of those votes. Coalition probably picked up a few of those, but the comparison that I think you're alluding to is the 2010 election, which was the last time that the opposition were trying to knock off a first-term Labor government. Yeah. And the primary votes were a lot different back then because One Nation weren't running and you didn't have the till. So it is difficult for the coalition now to get past that 40, but they have been at 40. In I think the poll before the end of last year, they got to 40. Now, at 40%, and presuming Labor's are still at 31 or 30, you'd have to say the coalition will be in a better position to form minority government than Labor would on those numbers.
Absolutely, yeah, no doubt. Simon, thank you as always. We'll talk to you right throughout the campaign
Look forward to it.
when it kicks off very soon.